A Foundation-certified cannibal is to accompany Mobile Task Force Lambda 14 manhunters in investigating all restaurants serving barbecue in the southern United States. Until SCP-4670 is recontained, all Foundation personnel within the southern United States are encouraged to avoid consuming barbecue pork products or engaging in conjugal relations with Greek women. That's it. That's the greatest thing I've ever done. It's all downhill from here. Glad you could make it to see the rise and fall of SCP Cafe. This is 2019 Week 23 Recap. I'm your host, Blue Soul, SCP Wiki moderator, chat operator, subreddit moderator, author, loving husband, dog petter, Cologne aficionado, Tottenham Hotspur supporter. You guys still did well. We're still really proud of you. Hey, here's a new one, podcast guest. Next week, I say next week, it may actually happen tomorrow. I'm going to be appearing on a podcast. I will be talking about the SCP Wiki and maybe even this show a little bit. I don't want to spoil it yet because I don't yet have all the info and I don't know when it'll be released. So we'll see. I've been keeping this sort of under my hat for a couple of weeks now, but I got reached out to, and this is not another SCP-related podcast. This is a more mainstream, more popular production. So it's going to be cool. I'm really looking forward to it. Now, I had informed you guys that by the time you heard the show, there would be a new contest up. That didn't happen. At least, that's not my fault. You can blame CO for this. I certainly do. Okay, so here's the thing. The contest, as far as all of the text, all the stuff going into it, is ready. They could pull the trigger on it right now. So what's the holdup? Artwork. Apparently, there's some really cool art in the works, but some issues came up, some real-life stuff, which, it happens. And they needed a couple of extra days, but I have it on good authority, and for what it's worth, I had it on good authority last time, too. But I have it on good authority that Monday, June 10th, Community Outreach will be revealing the new contest. I can't tell you guys yet, but it's going to be good. I think when people see it, they're going to really want to dive in. I'm excited to see what comes of it. And I don't have a whole heck of a lot else to talk about. Let's dive in. Week 23. Week 23 was a really busy week, and I'm around on the Site 19 chat pretty much all week, and I see people will announce their new articles in the channel, and this week I knew was going to be an absolute bloodbath just by seeing the names of people that were posting works, authors that I really trust, and just the sheer volume of works that were submitted this week. It was the biggest week in a couple of months. There were 22 skips at the time of selection and 20 in scope. Now, the selection period was 8 days instead of 7 for week 23 because it was a day shortened for week 22 because I went to a pro wrestling event. I went to WWE Live, and it was awesome. I have no regrets at all. But just a lot of skips to get through on selection day, and it was really difficult. This was some of the fiercest competition to narrow it down to 5 that I've had yet. But we've managed. I have 5 skips to cover, and we're going to get things started with SCP-4297, titled The Emu-lution of War by Devin Martin. Now, this is a piece that I've gotten to see evolve over the last week or two as Devin's been, in Site 19 and the critters, asking around for making an Emu War skip. And he got enough ideas to where it was like he wanted to play it straight. He didn't want to make it into a J, but there were so many ideas thrown out there. And that may not be fair to him. This may be entirely his own doing. But at the same time as 4297 was released, he also released 4297J. And I don't think I've ever seen that, where an author releases a main lister and their own J at the same time. So just for that basis, it's really cool. Now, the first thing you see on 4297, outside of it being a Keter with a threat level of red, is we have an image of some emus in a field, and one of them is circled in red. And the one circled in red appears to be wearing a camo helmet, and around his rather long neck, dangling, he has a set of binoculars on a strap. How the emu manages to get the binoculars up to its eyes is apparently an exercise left for the reader. We have procedures that are a little longer than average in length. We are apparently hand in hand with the Australian government in dealing with 4297. Given that it's a Keter designation, we're actually exterminating active 4297 colonies. Once such a colony is terminated, we amnestize with Class A amnestics civilian populations within 10 kilometers. We also have 2 MTFs involved, Kappa 5 pecking order, as well as Nu 7 hammer down. They cooperate to carry out Operation Invisible Face, and details of this operation are available to level 4 and up personnel. And then we have an update here at the end of the procedures, and it is discussing the town of Morgan. I'm guessing this is just Morgan, Australia. It has been designated a protected wildlife preserve. This is Biological Site 730. The perimeter of this site has electrified chain link fencing, 1.8 meters in height. 2 members of Kappa 5 patrol the perimeter of the site to monitor for covert activity and inspect the perimeter for damage. All personnel involved with Operation Invisible Face have been administered Class A amnestics and reassigned. So something happened back in 2013, and let's see if we can figure out what exactly it was. The description indicates, as you might guess, that 4297 is the designation for an unknown number of emus. They are intelligent, capable of communication, and display a high level of adaptability as well as situational awareness. They typically utilize their beaks and feet to grasp and manipulate objects, often in conjunction with their claws, such as when firing a rifle. That's a pleasant thought, isn't it? It goes on to say that instances of 4297 are capable of reproduction with anomalous or non-anomalous emus generating eggs. They can lay 20 to 50 eggs per season. 30 to 40% of them hatch as new anomalous emus. The remainder of them, the 60 to 70%, will instead contain weapons, ammo, other supplies, and this might even mean parts of objects which the emus assemble using tools that they also acquired in this manner. Ornithologists hypothesize that they're doing this via some sort of spatial anomaly, because the stuff that pops out of the eggs is a hell of a lot bigger than the stuff that the actual size of the egg, you know. So we can't test this because hatched shells are inert and non-anomalous. The anomalous emus are also capable of coordinating their egg production to manufacture larger machinery and ordnance, and in one case and we've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 black boxes, so at least 10,000 of them, coordinated to produce and manufacture an LGM-30 Minuteman III missile over the course of a single night. Now, the Minuteman missile, for those of you that aren't history and missile nerds, was one of the early intercontinental ballistic missiles, and it was the first MIRV, multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, ever to be deployed. They can carry nuclear weapons, so we have emus with long-range intercontinental nuclear striking ability. It's not great news. So we have a collapsible here, and inside the collapsible is a table. This table is a chronology of items that we have observed to be produced from these 4297 eggs, and what catches my eye on this is the first date. It's November 5th, 1932. This has been going on for a long time. And back then, it generated 6 .303 caliber Lewis automatic machine rifles, 12 magazines, 6 rifle slings, and 300 rounds of ammunition. So contrast that to a little bit later, December 4th, 1946, 836 eggs in concert managed to generate 2 M4 Sherman tanks, 50 M48 high explosive rounds, 30 M61 armor-piercing high explosive rounds with tracers, and 400 12.7 by 108 cartridges. They're learning. They're getting smarter. The emus have tanks. December 13th, 1980, the eggs produced field reads data expunged. Items generated also reads data expunged. And we have a footnote after the expungement that says, following incident 4297.24, the use of Thaumiel-class objects against 4297 is forbidden without a majority 05 vote. That's good and ominous. So that's the end of that collapsible. And it goes on to explain, we could probably surmise this, but it is good to reinforce it because it wasn't really explicitly laid out. They don't like us. Males, females, doesn't matter. They're hostile towards Foundation personnel and humanity in general. During the laying season, the emus basically prepare for war. They conduct military operations against nearby settlements. During their off-season, they typically only lay eggs when they're threatened. We also establish their learning. In particular, they're learning guerrilla tactics. They blend in with non-anomalous emus for protection and use their natural speed to escape if disarmed or wounded. They've apparently gotten so good and they're so readily able to reproduce that they have become very widespread throughout the Australian continent. So our containment efforts at this point are focused mainly on extermination of 4297 instances. That's a bit of a departure from what we would normally do in a skip, but I mean, at some level, if you want to do an emu war skip, you got to kill emus, and if there's a good reason to do so here if they're actively hostile, and we are capable of reducing their numbers, and we could potentially learn more about them along the way. I don't think I have any real issues with us trying to kill these entities as they come up and as the opportunity presents itself. Now, we have a discovery log here, and this is something I actually saw a lot of this week, a really, statistically unusual amount of this week. So let me get into it, and then I'll explain what I mean. The discovery log indicates that after World War I, returning soldiers in Australia were given land in Western Australia for use for farming. But in the story here, this was made difficult by the presence of a large number of 4297 instances, and we footnote that we did not know they were anomalous at the time. So the Australian Army was tasked by the Secretary of Defense to cull the emu population. They sent 2 men with guns and 10,000 rounds of ammo out into the bush in October 1932. That part is all 100% true. Military involvement was delayed until November because of heavy rain. What they had was a Lewis gun mounted on the back of a truck to keep up with the emus because they're fast. They can run about 35 miles an hour. Upon approaching a group of 4297, the emus mounted an attack from the surrounding brush. The birds had Lewis guns too. So the major in charge of this managed to radio for assistance before the transmission cut out. The Foundation assets intercepted the transmission, resulting in MTF Apollo 3 game wardens to Western Australia. So we have a little bit of revisionist history here in trying to explain real life events and oddities, historical oddities, through the Foundation's perspective. There was actually a ton of this week, and quite a few of them happened in articles we're not going to cover as part of the recap, but just a bizarre sort of convergence this week. A lot of people tried this, and I don't think any of them really talked to each other about it. In any event, the conflict after MTF Apollo 3 shows up resulted in heavy Foundation casualties due to both harsh terrain and intense, effective guerrilla tactics by the emus, but we managed to recover 10 of them and kill the remaining force. And that's how the Emu War was lost, historically. This is a real thing. I want to be 100% clear. This is one of those bizarre history sort of things. Get on Wikipedia, look up Emu War, and it has to do with the culling of emus in rural Australia. And the punchline is that the Australians lost. I won't spoil too much of it. It's fascinating, bizarre history and worth a read. Now, we have an incident log after this, and this is referenced from the table earlier up. October 27th, 1953. We don't know how many eggs were produced, but it was the cause of incident 4297.5. And in this incident, Foundation operatives detected high levels of radiation in a spot in Western Australia. We send in aerial surveillance, and we found a previously unknown colony of these anomalous emus numbering over 6,000. So in addition to all of the small arms and ammunition, Foundation Recon discovered about 40 Sherman tanks, 25 P-51 Mustang fighter planes, and one B-29 Super Fortress. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, so the emus have constructed a fleet of flying bombers, which is useful because they can't fly. So we make a snap decision here. We have reason to believe they could pierce the veil, and the O5 Council votes 12-1 in favor of eliminating this particular colony using a 10 kiloton nuclear bomb. This was deemed Operation Flightless Bravo. It was conducted with cooperation of the GOC and the Australian government under the guise of British nuclear testing. That phrase is a link. This link goes to Wikipedia. For nuclear weapons tests in Australia, the site of this test is known historically, and this is 100% true, as Emu Field. So I love the potential here that, it's sort of an urban legend that got out that, we nuked a bunch of emus at this site because if we didn't, they were going to fight back. That's the sort of thing that I think can really give a skip lasting power. So we drop the nuke. We nuke a shitload of emus. Afterwards, we note a surviving population of less than 100 of them. All of the vehicles, all of the aircraft are totally destroyed. New 7 Hammer Down is sent in to terminate the remainder via artillery strikes and sniper fire. The GOC actually helps out on this, but the sequence of events in them going in is unclear because at approximately 0700 local time, a second nuclear device was seen to detonate from the previous detonation site, the construction site where they're building all these planes and shit. This blast resulted in the termination of all of the members of the GOC as well as 9 members of New 7. And further recon determines the second blast eliminated all the remaining anomalous emus in the area, and it remains unknown how any instances were able to survive the first blast. We're saying more with less here. I really enjoy this. Now, after this, we have an addendum. This is a containment attempts log. And this is basically different proposals for ways we could attempt to contain these emus, whether they were approved or denied, and what happens as a result. This table is, it looks long, but it's due to the sort of the structure of it. There's actually only, 5 different things in here. And they start with things like eliminating nesting grounds with mortar fire. The trouble is that these emus learn very rapidly and basically respond in kind. And we go from there to trying to cull the population with sniper fire, and this is denied because we lay out, and it says very explicitly here, SCP-4297 creates weapons to maintain parity with its attackers. Yes, that's true. And yes, it would make sense that the research lead would have enough of a handle on it to say it as such. I still don't know that I like it being said quite so plainly. I don't know. It's one of those that I think that's a personal preference sort of thing. I could very easily be convinced that no, it's fine. But this whole little log, I feel like it kind of hurts the pacing of the work, because we had this incident of, setting off a nuke and then having presumably the emus respond in kind with a nuke of their own. And then we go into a log of, things like mortar fire and sniper fire. Like, the pacing seems backwards here. Like, you normally, if Call of Duty taught me anything, it's that you escalate up to a nuke. And we're kind of going at it backwards. Now, what happens further down in this list of potential containment proposals was using an avian mimetic kill agent, which was denied because of the potential for counterattack with, lethal mimetic kill agents. And we also try a cognitohazardous agent causing the emus to be unable to perceive humans, which would prevent retaliation and allow for easier extermination of them. And the plan with this is that we will utilize it outside of their egg-laying season, outside of the hatching season, to prevent retaliation, get them on their downtime, as it were. And this was actually approved with an 0-5 vote of 7-4, 3 against, with 3 abstaining. So not the most unanimous of approvals ever. So we give this a try. We send in 2 mobile task forces in June of 2013. Oh, there's that date. We send in the MTFs. The MTFs have modified uniforms. They have a cognitohazardous agent visible on them. They also have scramble headsets. This was, made famous with the 096 log. These scramble headsets to prevent self-exposure. We find we were very successful. We were able to terminate or attempt to terminate all the emus present. They reacted with panic and confusion upon witnessing other emus around them die. And after a moment, they started to flee to the northwest, breaking through the line of MTF agents. They pursued these emus into the town of Morgan. Agents began to open fire until one of the female 4297 instances, and then we have a thing that says info hazard expunged by any personnel present. Due to escalating containment breach, 05 command authorized 10 to 2 to 1 the use of black box, thereby removing black box despite black box life. There's a lot of redactions here. Agents Lydiard, Cherry, and Beat have been posthumously awarded the Foundation Star for their efforts. We can only imagine what's going on here. You can probably think through it and come up with what the intended response was supposed to be here. What's the intended meaning behind the black boxes. And finally, we have behind the collapsible an Operation Invisible Face debrief log. This is between an Agent Skinner and a General Mackenzie, and Skinner relays what we already know. The cognitohazard worked. They couldn't see a thing until we started dropping them, but that's when they decided to get the hell out of Dodge. We chased them to Morgan, and I actually saw when it happened. When that one dropped the info hazard expunged. What in the hell could that be? Actually had one of them in my sights too, sir. And the general says the 4297 or the info hazard expunged. And he replies, one of the birds, sir. And the general says, your orders were to terminate the anomaly. Why didn't you shoot? And he replies, sir, have you ever worked on a farm? I don't see how that's relevant, but no. And Skinner says, my father raised a lot of livestock when he got older. Usually he'd let me work with the smaller ones. The mothers seemed to get less defensive around me, so I grew up doing quite a bit of that. The general says, Agent, I'm not sure what your point is here. And Skinner replies, you know what I saw underneath that 4297 before shit went haywire? He says, what? And Skinner says, a little one. Couldn't have been more than a month or 2 old. And the general replies, and? Skinner says, what I'm saying is, I didn't want to shoot the mother. And there's a pause. We know there's a pause because it says so. It says general pauses. And then says, Agent Skinner, you were ordered to go in there and destroy the enemy. That was your job on that day. That was the mission you were given. You weren't there to think in terms of men, women, or children. You were there for one reason, and that was destroying the enemy. And Skinner replies, the enemy? Who is the enemy? How can you distinguish between the emus and the skips, the good or the bad? All of them look the same. We end the article there. I really actually didn't see this ending coming. That we have a bit of a lesson in morality here, and it makes me want to go back and reread, because the issue I have with it is okay. So yes, you're correct in saying, if the anomalous emus look like non-anomalous emus and they're actually working to that end, like they're deliberately trying to integrate and become like guerrilla fighters, then that's problematic. But I would also feel, I would be quite surprised if this MTF that was sent in specifically for dealing with this situation would, have such qualms. When you have built up a very cold, not cruel foundation, the chances of killing the mother is, it's not really a question. The fact is, it's a percentage play that you do, because at the end of the day, it's a bird and human lives are on the line. Your fellow, MTF agents' lives are on the line. And I would be quite surprised at this actually playing out this way. But stranger things have happened. Human nature is a heck of a thing, and it manifests in weird ways under high amounts of pressure, and that would be the exact sort of thing that would happen in a situation like this. So it really, really stretches my my suspension of disbelief, but not to the point where I'm going to downvote it for being unbelievable. The fact is, if you got this far and it's about emus with guns, tanks, fighter jets, and nukes, this probably shouldn't be the breaking point of believability anyway. This is a +1. This does a lot of things well. It has some issues with, I still think, with pacing and a few things that could probably be snipped here and there in the interest of brevity, but overall quite good. Nothing to point at in terms of tone. That's all really solid throughout. The dialogue is fine. I'm just, take that ending for, take it as you will. I think there's a lot in the last two collapsibles that are open to interpretation, and I think that's a credit to the piece when you can take a number of different meanings out of the same work. Moving on. SCP-4621, titled An Eternal Fiery Nightmare, by Dr. Magnus. Oh, Captain, my Captain. Tech Captain, Dr. Magnus. Now, at times, I think in the past, Magnus has gotten kind of a bad rap when it comes to CSS and the styling of the overall site. It is not the case that anyone on tech is like super conservative or like honestly really, really in love with the current look of the site. We have reasons that are more tied in to wide accessibility and broad compatibility. And to sort of confirm that, if you take a look at this piece, 4621, outside of the rating box, every piece of this has been styled in some way that deviates from the typical look of things. The header is different. The procedures, like things are done in discrete boxes. The tabs have been totally restyled. All of this is new stuff. It's worth taking a look at just for seeing a new way of doing things. As far as I know, this is entirely Magnus's creation. I haven't seen any other skip or any other article, for that matter, use any of the formatting present here. Now, for an object class, we have Euclid. That's struck through, and now it reads uncontained. That's normally not a great start to things. We have procedures. This is within a tab view of special containment procedures and the previous containment procedures. Our current procedures indicate that it's currently uncontained within the Black Forest of Germany and is to be classified as Keter upon successful containment. Its last known location was outside of Feldberg, and it is to be reclassified a Keter level threat until further notice. That might be a little redundant given that our initial piece says it's to be classified as Keter upon successful containment. I feel like between the two sentences it could probably be condensed into one, maybe with a couple of extra words to say once we get it and, going forward, it will be a Keter level skip. Additionally, all forest fires created by the skip are to be contained with minimal involvement of local fire services. MTF Beta 6 Flower of Battle is to engage with the skip as appropriate to keep it away from population centers. Personnel who are not experts in hand-to-hand combat are not to approach the skip under any circumstances. So apparently you need to be a pretty good fighter to deal with this skip, and it can also cause forest fires. Our previous procedures indicate that the skip is to be contained in a secure locker within a standard humanoid containment chamber in Containment Site 812. The -1 is to be furnished with their preferred choice of weapon and access to Foundation combat instructors for as long as they are assisting in containment. During this time, no access to the skip is to be taken by anyone other than the -2. And then we have an apparatus. It is, I'll do my best here, a Zartion Diaghilev Somnambulus apparatus. That's a thing that lets you see into dreams, I believe. Because it says it's used to view and record dream sessions for further study and catalog. So those were our old procedures, and something happened, and our current procedures are that we know, a several hundred square mile area in which we could find the skip. And that's it. We go to the description. Currently, the skip is described as having been reclassified. It was formerly -2, so you may have to do a bit of scrolling back and forth to have this make immediate sense. It does play out understandably and coherently in the work. So the current skip used to be the -2. It's a hostile humanoid composed of fire and plasma occurring in a solid state through unknown anomalous means. It's hostile to all humans and will attempt to terminate any persons approaching its line of sight. The skip has heretofore always been observed to be wielding a German-style longsword. And at this point in the work, I knew we were dealing with a Magnus skip because he's a sword nerd. I knew he had one this week. I had a lot of little clues to lead me to my conclusion, and I was absolutely right. The previous description of the skip, whatever the original 4621 was, it was a leather-bound manuscript copy of The Flower of Battle by Fiore di Liberi with significant alterations, formerly owned by the D'Angelo family in Teora, Italy. So it's a book, a manuscript to be more precise, and the anomaly is a hostile entity referred to as -2 within a recurring dream/nightmare of the affected subject, which is -1. So the -1 will invariably have the same nightmare of a burning building in which they're being chased by a hostile entity. This would be our -2. It's described as a burning humanoid wielding a German longsword typical of the 15th century. It will attempt to chase down the -1 and terminate them within this dream world. If they do so, it's like the Matrix. You die in your dream, you die in real life. And not only do you die in real life, your body will begin to burn and over time immolate their surroundings. This fire burns between 713 and 812 degrees centigrade and presents a significant difficulty to extinguish because it's so damn hot. It will also re-originate from the body shortly after being extinguished. This effect will continue until the acquisition of a new -1 subject. If the Dash 1 manages to evade or defeat the Dash 2, the subject wakes up with no ill effects beyond mild fatigue and general complaints of a lack of restful sleep. So the issue, the dilemma we have here is that it sounds like every night. They're being chased and they have to either, fight and win or run for their lives. They have to do this every night. They have to win every night. The Dash 2 only has to win once. This is a good... this is something that we don't see a lot of. I've only seen it a couple of times recently where we lay it out pretty clearly. The bad guy only has to win one time for things to be a very unpleasant conclusion. We go into a log of containment efforts. Our first 12 D-Class all didn't make it a day. Our 13th attempt was a D-Class that had hand-to-hand combat training. He managed to evade for 6 days before being forced into physical confrontation. They lasted 6 real-time seconds before being terminated by this Dash 2. And we go on into a few more D-Class. One of them was a thief and a free runner before their incarceration. They managed to evade for 62 days before the Dash 2 managed to predict their attempted escape path. So apparently Dash 2 is also capable of some amount of learning and consistency across these dreams. That's even worse. So what's interesting to me about this one in particular is that we're starting to understand why we're keeping track of this is because so long as the D-Class is within our custody and they're able to successfully evade or handle this Dash 2, we've successfully contained the skip, but only under those circumstances. So they made it 63 days, and that was actually the last D-Class that we attempted to use because the next two, one of them, Andrei Kowalczyk, the former lieutenant of MTF Beta 6, managed for 342 days. They had been incarcerated due to us discovering they were addicted to an illicit demonarcotic substance. I don't quite know what that means. It's probably spooky drugs. But since his ingestion, the lieutenant has displayed significant withdrawal symptoms that bear a resemblance to stimulant and opioid withdrawal. We have not been able to successfully treat this in any way, so the captain of the MTF basically assigned them to this containment detail due to how damn good they are in hand-to-hand combat, specifically Japanese fencing. So I guess the other thing that we can sort of consider as we go through these different D-Class and people is that we have this apparatus that we've been able to sort of watch as things unfold and understand how to better work with and contain the skip. Now, one issue I have right now is that we're not clear on how this Dash 1 is selected. We have a vague sort of nod to the acquisition of a subject as Dash 1, but we don't go into any detail on what that acquisition process is or how it might relate to this book. The easy way out, I think, would be to, pick up the book, read it, read some passage, touch some part of it, whatever, and, it wouldn't take much to connect the dots there, but as it is, it's actually absent. That the reason this comes up is that we're apparently able to assign people to basically force them to become the Dash 1, the target of this Dash 2 in the dream world, as it were. So that's something that wouldn't take much fixing, or maybe I missed it. I don't think I did, but possible. Lastly, in our containment efforts, we have Giancarlo De Luca, the captain of Beta 6 Flower of Battle. Duration of successful containment was 1 day, and containment notes, which were normally quite lengthy, now says see Addendum 3. So that gives us a little something to sort of look forward to here. So we go from here into the first of 3 addenda. This is excerpts from Subject 16's journal. Now, Subject 16 is the Andrei Kowalczyk, the man that was addicted to spooky drugs and got voluntold to fight our guy in the dreams. So he initially basically is talking about how, he was surprised to be offered a second chance. And on the second day, notes that things are different in the dreams, that they can move like they used to, the cravings are gone, they feel like themselves. And the first time he crosses swords with it, and it's in quotes, it was clumsy. I managed to defeat it relatively quickly. The next morning I felt good. And there's no more journal entries here until day 28. So 26 days have passed, and presumably it's, winning these sword fights that are coming up. And he indicates that he thinks that it's learning. The moves that worked before no longer work. It gets its sword in the way at the last moment now and manages to counter some of my motions. When I wake up, my arms hurt. I feel like my fingers are burning now. And then we also say the doctors say the addiction isn't getting worse, but it's not getting better, and it probably never will. So that is the last entry for over 3 months. The next log is day 134, and it says, all I can think about is the fucking ash. So I guess that's the name of our flaming man. The addiction isn't getting worse, but it just won't fucking stop. My hands are basically useless, and they're feeding me at meal times now. Giancarlo came by to see me a few weeks ago. He said he was proud of my progress and for rising above the ash. I feel like such a fucking failure, and he doesn't even realize I'm falling apart. I haven't risen above shit. So actually, with a little bit of extra context, it would seem Ash isn't the spooky guy. It's not our flaming man. It is the drug that this man took and is still addicted to. Now, all I can think about is the ash. The addiction isn't getting better, but it won't stop. So it's, I think what we're supposed to take away from this is that he's getting more fatigued from his sword fights in the dreams, and compounding that with the symptoms of this withdrawal that is more or less permanent. He's kind of spiraling out of control. That's the last log until day 341. So that is, what is that? 210 days. So 7 months later. And he says, I'm sorry, Giancarlo, I can't take it anymore. I'll never hold my sword again, and he's getting better every goddamn night. I'm so tired, so shaky. I just can't take it anymore. Thank you for believing in me. And he did not attempt to defend himself on the 342nd day of containment. Dash 2 had demonstrated significant improvements in its combatability over the course of time that Kowalczyk contained it. It's estimated that Dash 2 would have overpowered Kowalczyk within the next month. So that's an interesting little story, and I like that this addendum is sort of a self-contained story within the story. We've got rising action, we've got falling action, and you have a sad story of, sorting this, again, the bad guy only has to win once. All of your efforts, you have to do the same thing every day, even, no matter how much more difficult it becomes each day, you have to do it even better the next just to maintain the status quo. And you have to do that forever. The bad guy only has to win once. It's really powerful. So our second addendum is a transcription of 4621. This is presumably the book before our current state of things where it's been reassigned. This is different sections of this book. It's basically a story of a fencing master traveling throughout Germany during his study of European schools of swordsmanship for the writing of the Flower of Battle. It's hypothesized that 4621 is the original manuscript of the Flower of Battle, and it's recounted as 3 different encounters with an unnamed German noble. So the stories have to do with this master traveling around the German countryside looking for places to ply his trade, either to learn things from others or to offer his services sort of as a resident tutor to a lord or their children, whatever might make sense, and give them a place to stay for a little while and continue on their journey. So this first story has to do with he stops in and decided to pay his respects to another wandering swordsman since they were already in residence there, and he asked this German about his background, and the answers were strange. After a lot of coaxing and booze, he finally successfully challenges the German to a practice bout, if you will, little training sparring session, and finally understood why he was so reluctant to explain anything about himself or to even have this sparring session, because he's totally unskilled, and whatever he was teaching to this lord's son was worthless. So our storyteller here dispatches the German, this imposter, on the training pitch, and the Lord dismisses him out of hand. And our master says, "I cannot abide fakers and cheats," and took no pity on watching him thrown out of the manor. And that he stayed at the house for several more weeks, taking food and supplies, after instructing the Lord and his son in the art for as long as they had time for such diversion. I'm glossing over a bit. This is actually a really interesting sort of the language changes. It is meant to be closer to a manuscript in an older time. The differences in word changes are subtle, and it's one of those where it could be because it is an Italian translation to English. It could be due to the age of it. It could be a little of both. But there's little subtle differences in these transcriptions and the rest of the work, and that, really dry clinical tone that I think makes this really pop as something different. I would maybe even be tempted to add some markup to it, a little bit of color, a little bit of something to really set it off as that this is a work from an older time. This is something that should be treated as separate from the work you've been reading. So we go into the second story, which is our master, our protagonist here, at the Lichtenauer Academy, which apparently they trained themselves before beginning to write this manual, and they were there to try and pay their respects and trade whatever things they knew and could teach for new things they could learn from the resident masters and instructors. And imagine his surprise when he finds the same German that he had donked on at the previous manor in residence as a guest instructor. So he goes to the master of the school and informs him that, hey, this guy kind of sucks. Did he improve, a lot, really recently? And the master replied that he was accepted on the word of several other masters, but that this master hadn't had the time to test this guy's skills on his own. So the next morning, the German was called to demonstrate a simple Oberhau, which I'm assuming that's simple. I'm told it's simple. I have no reason to doubt it. And apparently it didn't go well. His form and understanding were below rudimentary. And in a rage, the German accuses our protagonist of conspiring to disgrace him, calling his honor into question. His defeat was swift and total before the assembled school, and once more I took no pity on him as he was thrown out of his residence built upon fraud. So we go into a third one, and this has a collapsible. It says, Death of the German within Hausach, and he finds himself at a manor house, and this is at the invitation of a local magistrate who are, they've got kids. The kids are interested in pursuing a military officer's commission and wanted to be instructed in swordsmanship to improve their breadth of skill. He was offered generous pay and set off immediately to go take this job on. He was brought into the manor with open arms. The young men to instruct were able and ready to learn, and several days passed and things were going really well On the second week, he was informed there'd be a banquet for several guests, and the host pressed upon our protagonist to be a storyteller, tell them tales of his travels, to which he agreed, and it was not really an unreasonable request. As etiquette demanded, he came unarmed to this banquet, which brought him to a surprise because the German was apparently the guest of honor, fully armed and ready for battle. And our hero, our protagonist, found himself armed with only his belt knife and his wits. The magistrate's sons, who he'd been training all this time, were also arrayed against him. And he writes, "I find that young men overly appreciate their blades and neglect their brawling and grappling. Had they let me teach them for several more weeks, the young man guarding the door would have kept his shoulder in his socket and his sword arm intact." So apparently still didn't end well. He gets his sword from his quarters and smelled smoke on the air. He enters the house again. The German stood in front guarding the door. Flames had begun to lick up and down the frame of the house. The German believed he could defeat me as we had clashed twice. I do not take pleasure in the cutting down of the untrained, but in this case I was gratified to remove this pretender from the earth. I can still remember the curse flying from his lips as I dispatched him. This is the last memory of that dabbler. May he be forgotten forever. But he wasn't, as it turns out, as we find in Addendum 3. So after Lieutenant Kowalczyk, and actually, no, before I get to that, so this is the second time in a row with these addenda that we have a story within the story. This is something I almost never see, where these little slices to build up the overall backstory and add depth and nuance do more than that. They actually become a really interesting addition in their own right and have little self-contained story arcs. That's really cool. So Addendum 3. Captain Giancarlo De Luca. He petitioned to be allowed to contain this -2. He was a practitioner of the particular school of swordsmanship that is the namesake of our author of the manuscript. So he was thus uniquely qualified to contain -2. This was initially opposed, but was overridden by the director and commander on duty, and he was allowed to take up the post. So he spent exactly one night containing this -2, and what we have is, and there's a note before we get into this log in a collapsible. Of note, the Zartian Diaghilev Somnambulus produces transcriptions through the subject's stream of consciousness. As such, any mistakes, divergences, or word choice is purely based on the subject's mental description of their dream state. So that's an interesting thing to lead in because it leaves open a potential unreliable narrator situation. So with that said, this log begins with the captain gaining consciousness within a burning building. He finds a sword on the floor next to him, holds it in front of him, and advances through the halls going towards the foyer, and our -2 is waiting for him there. The captain advances down the stairs, keeping his sword in front of him. -2 is transfixed, his eyes locked on the captain's sword. The captain reaches the bottom of the stairs and stands across from -2 in a defensive stance, which is known as the full iron door. And -2, apparently for the first time up to this point, speaks. He says liberi, which was the master in the manuscript, the author of it. The -2 advances towards the captain. The captain waits and steps to his left, raising his sword to intercept an overhead, completes the motion, bringing his sword across, parries and strikes at -2's back. -2 doesn't care for that one fucking bit. He emits a high-pitched sound, and within 4621's containment chamber, the manuscript begins vibrating within its containment locker. The captain and -2 exchange several more blows, with the captain wearing -2 down. With the approval of the containment director, the manuscript's locker is opened and it has begun to smolder. -2 says never again, lunges at the captain. The captain evades and runs -2 through with the sword. -2 dissipates as is common on its defeat, but the captain does not immediately awake. And at this point, the manuscript has burst completely into flames in the real world, destroying the manuscript despite our best efforts. The captain's unconscious body is moved out of the containment chamber, and he awakens several hours later. And after these events, an entity matching Dash 2's description was sighted in the Black Forest in Germany, leading Dash 2 to be reclassified as SCP-4621. DeLuca is no longer classified as Dash 1 and article. There's a lot to unpack there at the end, and it's not, you can make some assumptions here. Given how the work ends, we are kind of left to make the assumptions because there's no confirmation in the work. But it's a cool story, and the overall cohesion of it and solid pacing really set it apart this week. There is a lot to like in this work. It doesn't say a ton of things that don't need to be said. Despite the length of it, I think this is really compact and solid for all of the things it tries to put out there. I would particularly recommend reading this one as opposed to this recap for Addendum 2, because I find the transcriptions in here are quite good and something pretty different from the sort of thing you would normally see in an article. It would seem normally out of place, but I think it's done well here. It's explained why it is well here, and I really have no complaints here. I thought this was a really well done skip and an easy +1. Moving on, SCP-4228, titled Karma Kameleon by T. Rutherford. This is the second work of theirs in as many attempts, I believe, as we've covered here on Cafe. Covered SCP-4281, Stalled Conversation, back in week 18. So the first thing you notice with this piece is a dark green box in that takes up the whole width of the thing, that's meant to be sort of a computer terminal. The user entering their credentials is 054, and they pull up the article and test log for 4228. They note that there's additional stuff in here beyond the main and the test log. There's interview logs, recovery logs, action report, site manifest for a Site 45 containment log as it existed on 2/8/19. We are only pulling the relevant stuff. I think this is a kind of a cool sort of convention. I'm not sure I'm totally on board with this particular execution, but the 054 bit does become relevant further on in the work, and so as you scroll down, it looks more like a typical SCP article with an image block on the right-hand side. They look to be VHS tapes, possibly. They are mostly blurred out. You can see the master sticker on each of them that is black on orange, and there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tapes visible, and the caption reads SCP-4228 1 through 7. So we have an object class of safe and only 2 sentences of procedures. Dash 1 through 7 will be held in a high security storage vault at Site 45. Testing of 4228 has been suspended indefinitely. So not a lot to process there. We apparently had good reason to suspend testing, which I guess means we tried it at some point and didn't care for it one bit. The skip is described as an unaired children's TV series known as Karma Kameleon's Adventures on Earth, and the format of a lot of this is, it feels quite similar to 993 Bobble the Clown. I feel like the comparisons here are almost inevitable, given that we've got different episodes. They're all described in little summaries and a result or a note that occurs during this episode. But there are some quite significant deviations here, and it's not fair to the work to call it a Bobble knockoff, because there is a little more going on. In particular, these episodes basically contain a mimetic agent, a virulent mimetic agent at that. It impairs a person's ability to dream, and I swear to God, when I saw this, it impairs their ability to dream. I knew the title. Like, we're seriously not doing a Karma Kameleon skip where it's things become red, gold, and green like the song. Like, because I'm really not in the mood for this. We don't quite do that. So you're welcome. So, watching the episodes impairs their ability to dream, their capacity of different aspects of dreaming, and actually will cause deterioration of their overall creativity and fantastical thinking. So, as more episodes reviewed, subjects will exhibit a matching increase in desire to watch more episodes and consume related media. We don't know if the skip contains some form of addictive cognitohazard or if it merely becomes a substitute for the subject's weakened imagination. And we acquired this skip during a raid on Oliver Brothers Inc., known affiliates of Marshall, Carter, and Dark. So we have next a table, and it is 7 episodes, and they're little silly things. It's a kid's show. So Karma Chameleon in the Rainbow Forest, episode 1, travels through the Rainbow Forest on the brand new Vine Line tram, picking up his friends along the way. All the trees and other foliage in this episode display a disorienting, rapid shift of color. And after watching this episode, the affected person's dreams no longer contain distinct visuals. Elements are present as silhouettes or amorphous blobs. And there are 7 things like this where we've got a title, a short synopsis, and a resulting effect on dreams. Dreams cease being interactive. Elements no longer respond to physical or verbal cues. Dreams no longer contain distinct sounds such as speech, only muffled ambient noise. Dreams no longer include people, objects, or events from the dreamer's real life. And in an interesting little note here, this is episode 4, Karma Chameleon and the Sad Machines. And the synopsis here reads, "Oh no, during a moonlit stroll, Karma and his friends find a cut down part of the forest. Jigsaw and the Sad Machines don't want to keep hurting the trees, but the Hollow Men will make them when morning comes." And this episode features a very monotonous color palette. The Sad Machines have rust-like tear stains, and throughout the episode, these characters attempt to destroy themselves by slamming their bodies against rocks and jumping from tall trees. So, again, the connections to 993 are hard to avoid, especially when we do get into fucked up stuff on ostensibly kids shows. And it's difficult because it all sort of does make sense to a certain extent as we get towards the end of the work, but it really is something to kind of be mindful about when you're writing something that it has those major themes in common with a super, super popular work. You've got to set yourself apart and do it early and do it often to say, I'm not trying to, ape somebody else's idea. And the fact is, fucked up kids shows are, Bobble doesn't have the monopoly on it just because they did it first. There's a lot of inherent potential for creepiness there. So, I could see people complaining that this was a 993 knockoff, and I don't think that's fair to the work because 993 doesn't get license to own that thing forever. This does its own things and does them pretty well. That said, this does encroach in a couple of areas in these episode listings. These last 2 in particular use some elements that are really hard to get that connection out of your mind. So in this 6th episode, many characters and set pieces disappear into a massive angry-faced wood chipper. And instead of the music that would normally accompany these episodes, there is no music. Instead, there's an effects track containing chainsaws, wood being pulped, and animal shrieks. And in the 7th episode, there's no summary, there's no synopsis. It's a first-person perspective of Karma Chameleon in a cage traveling through real-time live-action scenes, and the last shot is a zoom-out showing Karma alone in a small glass enclosure at the city's zoo. Karma's the only animated figure amidst all of these live-action humans passing through the shot. Their bodies are covered in static. This episode is 2 hours and 16 minutes longer than any other, and there's no music. The majority of sound during this episode is Karma's own panicked breathing. And the effects of both of these is on the former, the subjects no longer possess a tangible body while dreaming, and the latter is that dreams 1/3 of the time will take place in a beige six-sided room with no windows or doors. So where it kind of becomes problematic here is the trope of the episode where it would normally have music. Instead, we have no music and a live sort of shot of panicked or shrieking in this case. The Bobble episode where there was a fire and where you would normally have music, instead you hear screaming and a lot of things to indicate that it's closer to real life. Now it's getting to be a little too much in common to ignore. And it's difficult because, these are, again, tropes that one particular piece doesn't necessarily have a free pass to use forever, but at the same time, too many of them coming from the same place becomes problematic. And this, at least those two little areas might fall on the wrong side of the tracks there. So what we have after this is we go back to this little green box, this little interaction with an AI, and it says that basically when you access the skip, a file was automatically flagged for you, and this now shows behind a collapsible. This is file name 054-brdn.scp, and we have a block quote in the center of this collapsible. And it reads, "Try not to think about it. That's what the administrator told me on my first day as 054, one of only a handful of times we've ever spoken directly. I'm still not sure which question they were even answering. I've asked so many. Was it deep wisdom or were they brushing me off? Either way, over the last 23 years, that motto has kept me sane and on many occasions actually saved my life. Information is dangerous, and I'm not even talking about info hazards. Immortal lizards and neck-snapping statues will always be a significant threat, but the communication age has made it so a simple fact can be the difference between a stable society or a world crumbling. For the Foundation, it's the perfect enemy. The only way to kill information is to forget it. Then when it reemerges, you have no idea how to fight it again. All you can really do is hold it in the smallest possible cage. When it comes to SCP-4228, you are that cage." Interesting and altogether ominous. What we have now, it looks like we have the entire SCP again, but there's some big differences here. This object class is Keter. The image, where we previously had tapes 1 through 7, this is a wider shot. There are 7 more tapes. 1 through 14, and tape 7 was destroyed during acquisition. And we have what looks like updates to the procedures and the description that are marked in red. And the highlights of this, SCP-4228-1 through -6 will remain sealed in Site 1905 EX chamber. -7 is considered lost. 4228 is a children's television series known as Kameleon's Adventures on Earth. The series comprises a single season, 14 episodes in length, and we go again to a block quote, and it reads, "Let me clarify. The public document you recently read actually details episodes 8 through 14. Episodes 1 through 7, however, were one of the Foundation's greatest oversights, a story that begins in late 1993 when a young woman showed up at the doorstep of Site 26 half alive. She had a self-inflicted gash on the side of her neck and the surrounding remains of a tattoo told us she was a Marshall Carter and Dark intern." Interesting. There's a lot to unpack there. Now, again, we have a table of episodes. We have the designation and the title. The synopsis is totally expunged, and the list of effects are also here, but this isn't the story. The story is the block quote exposition going on throughout, in between all of these individual episodes, and this lays out everything that is truly scary about this piece. So I'm going to give a brief synopsis of this. In 1989, Marshall Carter and Dark were approached by artists. They wanted to produce an anomalous cartoon that made children grow into good, eco-friendly adults. they would get their better world, and Marshall, Carter, and Dark would receive 100% of all show profits. And what MC&D provided, besides capital, was what the defector, our informant, called a Nemet, or a Muse Baron, a very rare, very ancient form of living idea that could be shaped as it develops, and that's why it's so infectious. It's not merely an info hazard, it is a true self-propagating memetic virus. So Karma Kameleon wraps production in 1992. All of the assets are seized, and somewhere in the contract, which is being an MC&D contract, quite dense, there's a byline that read, if MC&D feel their investment has been poorly utilized, they may claim total proprietary rights over the entire production company and its assets. We don't understand how these artists would ever trust Marshall, Carter, and Dark. They may have been blind, they may have been desperate, they may have simply been arrogant, we may never know. What we do know is that they resold Karma Kameleon to a small but ruthless distribution company, Oliver Brothers Inc. They kept its infectivity and its ability to figuratively and literally capture the imagination of its audience and every other tangible element of it. What they changed was unforgivable. If this memetic virus is truly alive, what Oliver Brothers did must be considered torture. The dream impairments are only a side effect of this brutality. It's a symptom of a deeper trauma that the skip was made to inflict on the mind. The goal of Oliver Brothers, as far as we can tell, was to commodify imagination itself. They wanted Karma Kameleon to be the world's only source of whimsy, and had it not been for luck and the haunted conscience of a single intern, we might have faced a true EP-class thought tyrant scenario. I love that line. So 4228-EN was one of the biggest operations the Foundation ever launched. All evidence of 4228 was expunged from this world. There might be a few thousand lizard toys in a landfill somewhere, but anyone who finds them won't recognize the character, despite the fact that by December of 93, Karma Kameleon was as recognizable as Mickey Mouse. The skip spread too fast. Stopping the broadcast and dismantling Oliver Brothers wasn't enough. Our only option was the Ennui Protocol. This is something that is fairly deep into Foundation lore, and you don't have to know a ton about it to make this still work. And in fact, I'm going to come back to it. So out of everything, only this document and the 14 master tapes remain. The good news is that we stopped it. Episodes 8 through 14 will never see light of day. We were even able to pull episode 7 off of the air, but it was a messy, destructive operation, and our best guess is that 13 to 20% of the population were infected before we were able to act. To the rest of humanity, this will forever be just an unexplained quirk of nature. This block quote happens right between episode 6 and 7. Episode 7, the table, reads Karma Kameleon and the First Hollow Man. Data expunged. Subjects will dream only in black and white. We have one more pull quote. Do you know what the worst part is? It's realizing that my fellow O5s probably have their own secrets to keep, and it's entirely possible that they're worse, far worse, than SCP-4228. Sometimes, when I look across the boardroom, I can almost see the chains of burden hanging across O58's shoulders. If 4228 is the truth that haunts me, then what simple fact might that woman know? Try not to think about it and have a good first week, 054. Secure, contain, protect whatever we have left. Signed, 054, retired and/or deceased. So 2 things. The Ennui Protocol and the last bit here that says try not to think about it. This is a link to SCP-8900-EX. This is, to the best of my knowledge, the original inclusion of the Ennui Protocol to the wiki. And basically, you can summarize it as, I like to think of it as an airborne amnestic. And what it does is basically, it makes people believe that whatever they experience right now is the way that it's always been. 8900EX is an awesome skip and really worth your time. As old as it is, it was really ahead of its time, did a lot of really cool things. Yorick did a lot of good work for the wiki. That may be one of the most pivotal pieces on here for making -EX as a viable class. There's a lot to unpack here at the end of this work, because signed 054, retired and or deceased, is the end of the article. And I really, really enjoyed this. As it continued, it got farther and farther away from Bobble the Clown's shadow. That's to its significant credit, because it was really in the hole for a while. And honestly, the inclusion of the lack of music, just hearing shrieking and other really unpleasant things, it doesn't actually bias anything for the work, but what it does do is give it an uncomfortably tight association with an existing really popular work. I think I would get rid of it, as it's good visceral stuff. And is it fair? No, but that may be the thing to do, is just cut ties with stuff that gives it too tight an association with another piece. I enjoyed this work a lot. I think T. Rutherford as an author is en fuego right now. They're doing really good stuff, and I hope they keep going. The first two have been absolutely tremendous for first and second works. This was outstanding. Very easy +1. Moving on. SCP-4046, titled What Do You Want to Be When You Grow Up, by Uncle Nicolini. We have no images. We have no real deviations from the format at all here. We have an object class of safe and 2 sentences worth of procedures. Keep the thing in an objects locker. Requests for children to use in experiments with 4046 are to be submitted and approved by at least 2 level 3 personnel. Oh, I lied. I guess there is a third sentence, isn't there? I can count, I promise. All subjects used are to be amnestized following the conclusion of experiments. And 4046 is described as a microcomputer kit with a similar appearance to the Telmac 1800 series. So this is quite an old school computer. This would have been contemporary with old Tandy and TRS-80s. And since I think the average readership and maybe even the listenership of this podcast may not even be old enough to buy a legal drink, let me back up just a little bit. These are, imagine an old tube TV with a big chunky mechanical keyboard on the front, and you're in the ballpark. This was before such a thing as Intel processors. Most of these computers had about 4 kilobytes of RAM, and you didn't do a whole lot on them. So this is an early computer, and what's interesting with it is that the W key on the keyboard is in a stylized cursive serif font, so we might be able to make some assumptions here. A faded yellow sticker with the phrase "proof of concept, not for manufacture, R&D department" is present at the bottom of the computer. When the skip is activated by a subject between the ages of 4 and 11 with inconsistent results up to the age of 16, a message will appear on its screen reading, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" When an answer is typed and submitted to 4046, the subject will be rendered unconscious momentarily, and upon waking, they report having experienced decades of time working in their chosen profession, typically beginning at the moment of employment and ending at retirement. This experience is extremely vivid and realistic, but all subjects report being aware that it was a simulation. In addition, they report having a personal life, having a significant other, raising children, etc., alongside their work life. It's currently unknown how it does any of this stuff. It's whether it's through simulation or projection or prediction or what, we don't know. What we have is a list of observations. We have somebody that wanted to be a doctor. He reported a career spanning 45 years as a family physician. We have a girl named Alice that wanted to be a witch when she grows up, and upon being awoken, the subject thaumaturgically transported herself to an unknown location outside of Site 55. That's fun. Oscar wanted to be a wrestler. He reported a career spanning 24 years prior to being forced into early retirement due to a spinal injury. He did not express regrets in his choice of profession. Good man. Jasmine wanted to be a firefighter. She claimed to be put off from the line of work after describing their failure to save several people, but decided they still wanted to pursue the career. David wanted to be a basketball player. He awoke in an agitated state, reporting having an initially successful career, followed by a sharp decline caused by alcoholism and methamphetamine addiction. Kelly wanted to be a veterinarian. She awoke weeping uncontrollably, mourning the death of innumerable animals. Due to the subject's hysterical state, sedatives and amnestics were immediately administered. And yeah, that's really not a job for the faint of heart. It's a terrible sort of thing that we subject kids to, of this assumption, yeah, everything's going to be okay. I know a friend that's his wife's a vet, and every day after work, she comes home and hides under a blanket and cries. I cannot imagine. Last but not least, Eric wanted to be happy when he grows up. SCP-4046's anomalous properties did not activate. End article. So, short but sweet work here. This is an interesting peek at Wondertainment, early Wondertainment, maybe not having all the bugs worked out of a device that they're going to mass produce. One thing that I like here is that last bit, is because if you look at the tags, you've got the usual suspects: computer, Dr. Wondertainment, SCP, safe, toy, mind affecting, and then Eric. Eric wanted to be happy. Eric exists. Eric is a character in SCP lore, if you will, that goes all the way back to Series 1. There are a couple of skips that use him, notably SCP-168 and 066. He's quite long established. And the tie-in there, you don't have to know about him for this work to still be interesting, but it's that little extra reward for people that pick up on that and go, oh, okay, that might explain some of the stuff we see in the future. So, short, sweet, I like the imagery here, and that, it pulls no punches about what you might want to what it might actually be like, what you want to be growing up. I like the thought that they experienced decades of time and they come back and they're, fucking 4 years old. I really like that. This is a great work. And this was also a very easy +1. Now, last but not least, and most certainly not least, in fact, this week, it's a high skip of the week. It's currently at +110. SCP-4670, titled Pigs and Blankets by A Random Day. ARD. Coming through. So we have an object class of Euclid. We have an image a little ways down of a woman, appears to be fairly young, dark hair, wearing an earring, and sort of looking down to her left, and the caption reads, "Photo of SCP-4670 taken during initial capture." So, going back up to these containment procedures, I read that in my lead-in. I'm going to read them one more time. A Foundation-certified cannibal is to accompany Mobile Task Force Lambda-14 manhunters in investigating all restaurants serving barbecue in the southern United States. Until SCP-4670 is recontained, all Foundation personnel within the southern United States are encouraged to avoid consuming barbecue pork products or engaging in conjugal relations with Greek women. It is an absolutely incredible beginning. And why is it an incredible beginning? Because what this does, it sets up a lot of questions. You have a Foundation-certified cannibal. They're investigating barbecue in the South. Okay, we might have something where it's barbecue from people. So we're to avoid consuming barbecue pork products or having sex with Greek women. What? So if you are a Greek mythology nerd, you might have an inkling right off the bat. But if you are not such a nerd, you still, like, the thing that this does, it sets up a lot of questions the skip has to answer for. You can't The whole thing with Chekhov's gun. You show a lot of things in the beginning with these procedures, and the expectation that you've just placed is that you have to go back and answer for all of it. Why cannibals? Why pork products? Why Greek women? And the work does. It goes back and explains every little bit of it there, so it is a really standout opening. Additionally, unprotected physical contact of any kind should not be made with the skip. The most expedient method of sedation and capture is via an electroshock weapon. If the skip is captured, it should be contained in a standard humanoid containment cell and guarded only by asexual personnel. Again, if you know your Greek mythology, you may know where this is going. If you don't, again, they're still good. And if you were like, what was the myth with the oh, it's killing me. Description: SCP-4670 is a Greek female of unclear age, self-identifying as CC Helio. We'll come back to that. I'm gonna read this straight, and then we'll have our show and tell session here. The skip possesses 3 known anomalous properties. 1, the ability to transform human beings into instances of -1 via touch. They are physically and behaviorally identical to non-anomalous pigs, but genetically and gustatorily, that's a good word, means tastes, identical to human beings. 2, extreme resistance to all known forms of chemical, mimetic, and cognitohazardous brain chemistry-altering substances. And 3, dramatically slowed aging. The skip has been active within the southern and southwestern U.S. since at least the 1900s. It's unclear how long it's been operating within the U.S., It primarily uses its abilities for semi-paraphilic serial killing by transforming its victims into pigs and then butchering and cooking them. The skip's birthplace and age are unknown. No birth certificate has been located. All of its identification papers have been found to be falsified. We have a discovery log that it was discovered more or less by accident. A Dr. Blackbox visited Cece's Pit Barbecue in Toccoa, Georgia. Despite having witnessed the flesh being cut from a pig, slow cooked over an open fire, our doctor reported the pulled pork he ordered was identical in taste and texture to human flesh. So we don't ask questions at the Foundation, you know. So these details were verified by 2 other certified cannibals. So, the one thing I didn't notice here, and it's not super important, but it does help in just the mental visualization, is that we didn't attach a year to this. I'm imagining a barbecue in Georgia. It's like an open air thing. For whatever reason, I'm like imagining this as like mid 80s. It's a hot, sticky day, whatever. The little things like that, I think, can add some little subtle touches to the story that can help the reader visualize. And you don't have to go back and really back any of that shit up later, but it does help the visualization, because I know as a writer you have sort of in your head how this went down, and you have to be careful in making sure that comes across, because otherwise we're left to imagine, and sometimes we don't get it quite the same way as it was intended. So our certified cannibals, the story checks out. We analyzed 3 separate pork dishes from CC's barbecue, and they returned DNA matches to a single police officer who had gone missing in Georgia in the previous month. Aw, pigs and blankets. God damn it. Okay, so at the time of discovery, the skip was both the owner and head chef of CC's. Background check at the restaurant showed it was not USDA certified. This was used as a pretense to shut down the restaurant, confiscate all the meat, and take the skip into custody at Site 5. So at this point, we have the opportunity to really do some digging here. All of the live pigs, as well as all the pork carcasses recovered from the barbecue, were found to be genetic matches to police officers who'd gone missing in Georgia over the previous decade during stakeouts, prostitution busts, and traffic stops. A search of the skip's apartment located several noteworthy materials. 1, several dozen sets of uniforms, equipment, wallets, badges, etc. 2, certificates of past health inspections for now closed restaurants dating back to the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act. 3 an oversized loom, 4 several dozen, I should say, boxes of condoms, 5 multiple types of plants and fungi that could be used to produce narcotics such as opium poppies, psilocybin mushrooms, and cannabis sativa, and 6 a membership card for the industrial workers of the world. There's a lot to unpack there, and we'll keep going for now. Our skip was initially not compliant with interviewers and highly resistant to interrogation. After 6 months, she escaped containment via a guard's credentials. Surveillance showed the skip luring the guard into its cell and then transforming her into a pig by patting her on the head while they were undressing. She transformed all subsequent personnel that she encountered into pigs and herded them through an emergency exit. And approximately 8 weeks after the skip's escape, Dr. Blackbox, presumably our original Dr. Blackbox, went missing. 1 week after his disappearance, an unmarked package with no return address was sent to the home of Site 5's director. It contained 1 pound of pulled pork found to be a genetic match to Dr. Blackbox. End article. So there's a lot going on with this piece. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. CC Helio. So this is essentially a modern retelling of the story of Circe from the Odyssey. Circe is the daughter of Helios, and her name in this work is CC Helio. We have in the materials recovered boxes of condoms, drugs, a membership card for the IWW, which for readers outside of the States, the Industrial Workers of the World was a socialist labor union that was active a few decades ago. We also have a note that she was able to lure a female guard into her cell. So we have a few sort of cliche things going on in here, sayings and things that you might have heard recently, like be gay and do crime. She dislikes, she's going after cops, pigs. So let's back up. The story of Circe in the Odyssey. Circe was the unloved daughter of Helios. She would lure men in, have sex with them, and turn them into pigs. And in this case, she's turning police officers, who, at least in the U.S., are sometimes derogatorily referred to as pigs, into actual pigs after presumably luring them in. So a lot of pretty straightforward connections to be made there. But the IWW card, the drugs that we found, she was a socialist. She had her own reasons to hate cops and necessarily, maybe what they stand for. I don't judge. I just, recap. So take what you will from the work. I absolutely could not ignore the first line of the piece, and for being altogether well done, well put together. It's a very easy +1, and that brings me to the end of week 23. This week was a lot of fun. It was tough sledding getting in this week. I enjoyed a number of skips that we didn't go through, and I try and cover the high points, but still keep it down to a reasonable length of time. I'm noticing these are getting longer because I have more to talk about as we go. So it kind of is what it is. The 5 skips are about all I feel like I can do and still have anybody want to listen to this thing, because I wouldn't want to hear me for an hour and a half, but you guys do, and I really appreciate it and love you guys for it. We'll do week 24 about this time next week, June 14th. Once again, big thank you to Moderator for the intro song, Space Vandals, off the album The World Within. You can find that at moderator.bandcamp.com. And if you thought this show was worth $1, always appreciate your support at patreon.com/scpcafe. I'm going to do some writing. Until then, keep reading, keep writing. I'll see you on the other side.